Today I want to introduce us to a technical term which is really important, and I don't want you to tune out or click something else. Stick with it because I think you'll find it meaningful. The technical term is that when we speak of God, we always actually speak analogically. Now what does that mean and why does that matter? Well, to speak analogically of God means that we are always speaking by way of analogy. Now what does that mean? Well, that means that whenever we speak or try to describe or put words to God, our words are always partial and approximate. Partial and approximate. In other words, we can never fully explain anything about God, and every time we do say something about God, it's never all that there is to say about God. So we're always speaking by way of analogy. Let me give you an example. So we say to each other, and we would sing and declare that God is just. God is a God of justice, and that is absolutely true, and that is a biblical truth, that God is just. However, what do we mean when we say that God is just? What is justice? Well, for all of us, justice is actually something very slightly different. Justice is actually subjective. Depending on circumstances, depending on culture, depending on what era of history that we find ourselves in, justice changes. Sometimes it's up to the judge or the jury or to the textbooks to tell us what justice is, but it is constantly changing. Sometimes justice might be remedial, so it's to remedy the situation. Sometimes it's punitive, so that we punish the offender. Justice is this moving target which we believe in, and we know really what it is, but we can't define fully what it is. So when we turn and we say God is just, God is a God of justice, we're speaking of God analogously. So we're speaking of God partially and approximately. So we know that God is just, but we cannot ever describe or understand or know what that fully means, and we'll always leave something out, and we're never absolutely accurate with our definitions. Now this is important because it means that whenever we speak of God, we're always by necessity required to speak with humility. We could also say that God is love, and we know that to be the truth because John tells us in his epistle that God is love. What does that mean? Well, again, we're speaking analogously of God to each other. My experience of love and your experience of love, they might be similar, but they're not the same. They're evolving, they're changing, they're deepening depending on our circumstances, our experiences, our family, our age, our stage, our culture, our creed. Everything is variable when it comes to understanding love. Now we generally know what it is and what it feels like and how it works, but we're never able to fully articulate what it is. So we're always approximate. We're never able to be absolutely exact and to the extent of defining the fullness of love, so it's always partial. Similarly, when we speak of God, as God is love, we're speaking analogously. So we're saying that God is love, but we actually don't understand the fullness of what that means, and we can't accurately describe exactly what that is. Now this is important because not only does it require of us now humility, but it also puts us in the exact posture to be more in touch with reality. And that is the reality that God is always more than. He's always above and beyond and transcendent. There is more to God than our words can ever articulate, than our categories can ever describe. It also challenges us to think, for example, God is justice, God is love. Well, think of that as a few weeks ago we were talking about divine simplicity. To say that, well, when we experience the fullness of God's justice, we are actually experiencing the fullness of God's love. And when we experience God's love, we're experiencing God's justice. They're not two separate categories inside of God. They are just God's life as it is, the fullness of His being. But these are words that we try to use to describe something of God so that we can understand and put articulation to the life of God to help each other know God and to serve and to follow. So to speak of God analogically is really the only way that we can speak of God, and it helps us remember and understand that there is always more to God than our words or our hymns or our creeds can ever actually properly describe. So then we lean into more. And it was like we were thinking about last time, when it meets us, these words, these truths, these beautiful doctrines of God's grace, they find us and they satisfy us, but they always leave us hungry for more, because even our experience of God is partial and approximate. It's not to its fullness. And so good theology leaves us wanting more. Good theology leaves us in a place where we are more hungry for God, more hungry for doxology, for worship, for prayer, for faith, for the community of God's people to be living the gospel, and calling us into that life of faith and service and worship. So as you ponder these things, may you be blessed and nourished. Peace.